Major AI companies have quickly and quietly become some of the biggest lobbyists across America, spending over $100 million to influence policy in the last year alone. In what might be their first major investment to actually generate a financial return, OpenAI has massively increased its lobbying efforts year over year, in addition to the usual suspects that have also upped their political contributions, and NVIDIA, who has typically been quiet in Washington, quintupling its spending to make sure that their voice was heard. And well, all of their well-funded voices have overwhelmingly been saying one thing.
I mean, we can't let the Chinese beat us in AI.
We are going to be the dominant player, or China's going to be the dominant player.
But it's nothing compared to what will happen if China beats the US on the ultimate goal of AGI, artificial general intelligence.
Yeah, that's right. If we overregulate AI, China will win. If we underregulate AI, China will win. If the government doesn't support and financial backstop AI development, China will win. If we sell cutting-edge chips to China, they will win. But if we don't sell cutting-edge chips to China, they will also win. AI lobbying has become some of the most effective in Washington because of China. And well, you know what? As dumb as it sounds, they might actually have a point. Despite all of the talk around how indispensable NVIDIA is to the current AI ecosystem, they themselves have admitted that their market share in China is now effectively zero, as local suppliers have developed their own alternatives, and that homegrown Chinese models are matching or even exceeding American models while using, supposedly, inferior hardware and using far fewer resources. And why would they admit to that if it wasn't true, right? At the same time, it's also becoming increasingly clear that current AI models might fall short in a lot of the applications they have been pitched on. But they are becoming incredibly effective tools for mass surveillance, warfighting, cyber warfare, and even just simple propaganda. So if this really is an existential threat that we simply can't let China gain the upper hand in, it is worth at least understanding the hypocrisies around how we are dealing with it.
Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything.
Technology, for example, active cyber attacks, attack a whole country, do it until everybody's dead, and you can imagine that scenario. You can also imagine the scenario where you say, I want to kill 1 million people, show me a biological path to do it.
New companies cannot comply with. You can't afford to comply with, it's too complicated, it's too hard to get to from a standing start. And then what happens is the big company now basically has a permanent government-supported monopoly.
We believe that excessive regulation of the AI sector could kill a transformative industry just as it's taking off.
Late last week, Kevin O'Leary, the method-acting movie star who occasionally plays a businessman on TV, announced that he would be building the world's largest data center in Utah, a project that is slated to use more energy than the rest of the state combined and cost tens of billions of dollars to build out. Now, despite wearing 2 very expensive watches at the same time, Kevin O'Leary does not have tens of billions of dollars. So, most of his work has been dedicated to securing favorable government approvals, regulatory fast tracks, and state-issued tax exemptions, with the vague hope that these can be offered up to a consortium of investors who will ultimately fund this project. Last week's announcement also came around 16 months after a similar announcement by O'Leary, that he would be building the world's largest data center, but this time in Alberta, albeit with a similar pitch around an accommodating local government that would cut red tape and hook them up to a practically unlimited supply of cheap natural gas. Now, as a shock to basically nobody, to date there has been effectively no tangible progress on either of these projects. Now, we have already made a video about how a large share of data center construction sites have been quietly canceled over the last year. And out of all of the data centers that will never get built, these are surely the least buildiest of all. But there is a chance, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, that O'Leary may not be as silly of a sausage as he seems. Now, the only reason why these proposals are really worth mentioning in the first place is because of the messaging that he has been using to make several governments bend over backwards to roll out the regulatory red carpet for a project they surely knew was never going to see the light of day.
Not in this case. We're building power from scratch from the pipeline. And by the time...
the pipeline is natural gas?
Natural gas, and we're going to burn it with turbines clean. But we can also give back to the grid. That's good for the community. But for the country, we need to compete with China.
So yeah, it's clearly an effective message. And for what it's worth, we probably don't want China to take a commanding lead on this technology. But there are 3 big, dumb, ironic problems to how we are currently addressing that threat. The first is that we are really only fighting this supposedly existential arms race when it is profitable to do so. The test of any threat narrative is whether the people pushing it actually act like the threat is real. And as it turns out, they really don't. The same companies warning that a Chinese AI takeover is a generational emergency are also the ones lobbying to sell their best chips into China, the ones telling regulators their products are too harmless to need a liability framework, and the ones actively fighting any regulation that would limit how fast they can scale. So these tools exist in some kind of tech bro superposition of simultaneously being the most existential threat to American dominance since the Cold War, while also being too harmless to require any regulation within America itself. It's a dumb message, but it's one that the industry is spending an ungodly amount of money on amplifying. Beyond the 9 figures of direct political lobbying that require official disclosures and major, podcast acquisitions to promote their talking points, certain companies in this space have also been exposed for running what are referred to as dark money campaigns that sit just outside of official regulations. As an example, OpenAI founders and early investors have been funneling millions of dollars into a group called Build American AI, which is in turn redirecting that funding to paid influencers to promote effectively the same narrative as Mr. Wonderful, just with a little bit less transparency. A, AI is something that needs to be kept in America, and B, we can't afford to let China win. The end goal is pretty openly to pave the way for a government bailout should OpenAI need it, hypothetically. Broadly speaking, they understand that AI is not politically popular. Government bailouts are not particularly popular either, but they are hoping that Chinese AI is even less popular. Now, the channel Wall Street Millennial did a great video on this earlier this week, literally as I was putting this video together, that went into detail about how they are channeling this money and crafting this message. So I will leave a link to his video in the description, alongside Taylor Lorenz, the journalist influencer who originally broke the story when she herself was offered money to repeat their talking points, but decided to expose them instead. Either way, it's pretty clear that this is happening, and this is the message they are running with. So while we might not have a 9-figure lobbying budget to push back against this, we do have basic logic to point out the flaws in their argument. The first irony is the most basic one. The same companies warning about Chinese dominance are also the ones lobbying hardest to sell their cutting-edge technology directly into China. For the better part of 2 years, the headline messaging out of NVIDIA, OpenAI, and most of the major AI labs has been that letting China get ahead is a civilizational risk that the US simply cannot allow. And then late last year, when it started to look like the AI sector might be headed for a market correction, that messaging got a little bit more flexible. In December, the government announced that NVIDIA would once again be allowed to sell its H200 chips into China, with the regulation formally taking effect around the Department of Commerce in January. The H200 is, by NVIDIA's own description, one of the most advanced production AI chips on the planet. China-bound shipments are technically capped at 50% of US sales and routed through US territory for inspection. But in practice, the cap on the H200 alone could allow up to 1 million units to flow into China, with potentially another million H100s on top. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, that is enough silicon to build the largest AI data center on Earth, and to add roughly 2.5 times Chinese AI compute compared to a scenario where they only had domestic chips to work with. So the same year we were told that China overtaking the US in AI was a generational threat, we also decided that selling them the actual chips required to do exactly that was perfectly acceptable, as long as the right American company was getting paid. Now that NVIDIA is allowed to sell into China again, they are not exactly thanking everyone and getting on with it. They are now lobbying to sell even more advanced chips on the basis that the H200 isn't competitive enough on its own to actually win them the Chinese market, which is impressive, confusing, both? When you remember that this is the same NVIDIA that has spent 2 years explaining to investors that CUDA makes their hardware essentially irreplaceable across the entire AI stack. One of those two stories has to be wrong, because they directly contradict one another. Either NVIDIA chips are uniquely irreplaceable, in which case Chinese labs will be paying through the nose to use them no matter how stripped down they are, or they aren't. In which case, the entire valuation of every AI company downstream of NVIDIA is built on a much shakier foundation than the market has been pricing in. The contradiction does not stop with chips either. The same companies that will, on a Tuesday, tell a Senate committee that their products are essentially harmless and don't need any kind of liability framework will, on a Wednesday, tell a podcast host that these are the most powerful creations in human history, with a real chance of wiping out the species.
Do you have a bunker?
I have like underground concrete heavy reinforced basements, but I don't have anything I would call a bunker.
Hold on, dude. Look, I'll let you keep me on the ropes in a lot of this conversation, but I am gonna call that out as a dang bunker, dude.
The harmless version comes out in front of the regulators, where the goal is to keep liability frameworks off the table. The species-ending version gets saved for investor decks and government grant committees, where bigger stakes mean bigger checks. Both can't be true, but both are extremely useful depending on which room the lobbyist happens to be standing in. And that's just irony number one. The next two are even harder to explain away, and they reveal a lot more about what this lobbying campaign is actually buying. So it's time to learn how many works to find out why the loudest voices warning about losing this arms race might be the exact same voices guaranteeing that we do, and what their version of winning actually looks like. The biggest companies in the world are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbyists to make sure the AI race plays out in their favor, and we are going to get into all of that. But while we are doing that, a lot of regular Americans are quietly going in the other direction, building something for themselves that does not depend on what way a senator votes. New business applications have stayed near record highs in the United States for 4 years straight, and a lot of those start the same way, with somebody who has a design or an audience trying to put it on a hoodie or a mug or a tote bag without becoming a logistics company to do it. This video is sponsored by tHe, a print-on-demand platform that handles every part of merch nobody actually wants to deal with: the inventory, the packaging, the shipping, and the returns. You design what you want in their editor, mock it up on the actual product, and that becomes your product. Nothing exists physically until a customer buys it, so there is no inventory order, no warehouse, and no boxes piling up in your living room. When the order comes in, tHe routes it to one of their print partners near the customer, prints it, and ships it directly. It connects directly to Shopify, Etsy, TikTok Shop, eBay, Wix, and a handful of other platforms. So your products show up wherever your audience already shops, and you keep the profit between tHe's cost and what your customer pays. You can even determine what you could make using their profit calculator. So if you have a design idea, a podcast, a community, or a brand, this is about as low friction as it gets to start a real business and an income on the side. Let's start today building a business with tHe. Use my link in the description to sign up for free, and use code HowManyWorks for 15% off your first order. Only the first 100 people get this offer. Okay, so the people giving the loudest warnings about losing the AI race to China are also the people lobbying hardest to sell China the chips and tools that would, in turn, let them actually win it. Not a great start. But the second irony is bigger, because it really isn't about who is selling what to who anymore. It's about what kind of regulation is actually getting pushed through under the banner of beating them. Even if you accept that an AI arms race is a real and imminent threat, almost none of the deregulation that has been pushed through under that banner is actually aimed at winning it. Most of the recent deregulatory effort has gone into two areas: environmental protections and energy prioritization, both designed to get private sector data centers online faster. The vast majority of the compute that those data centers will produce is not going to advance defense applications, secure cyber infrastructure, or any of the surveillance and warfighting systems that actually would matter in a real strategic competition with another superpower. It is going to ad targeting, AI customer service replacements, image generators, the 10th iteration of a chat product, and the 5th season of Fruit Love Island. If this really were a national security priority, the simple version of policy is straightforward. Narrow the scope of what counts as a strategic AI project, fast-track those, and treat the rest of the industry like the consumer product business it actually is. Instead, the policy has been to treat the entire industry as if it were the Manhattan Project. It might not be the best analogy, but something like steel clearly has civilian and military applications, so maintaining a ready supply of this stuff is a matter of national security. But we aren't going to let a car manufacturer ignore safety standards just because their products are made out of the same stuff as our artillery shells. Again, I know it sounds dumb, but the parts of regulation that have been most fiercely fought against are the parts that have nothing to do with national security at all. Liability for inappropriate imagery generated by these models, mental health protection for kids being exposed to AI companions, and actual responsibility for crimes these tools have been helped to facilitate, if not directly encourage. None of those rules would slow down America's ability to build a defense-grade AI system. If anything, forcing companies to actually clean up the worst behavior of their models would probably make them better at the things they are pitching to the Pentagon in the first place. The fact that those are the rules being lobbied against the hardest tells you what this campaign is actually about, and it has very little to do with China. Now, if you genuinely thought you were in an existential civilization-ending arms race, the obvious template is right there in the history books. We have done arms races before, and we have rules for them. Industries with the kind of national security exposure these companies claim to have are usually regulated like weapons manufacturers or nuclear energy operators, meaning strict licensing on supply chains, mandatory tracking of where the technology ends up, background checks on consumers, and end-use restrictions with criminal penalties for violations. It might shock you to learn that none of the people warning that AI could end humanity have actually asked to be regulated like people who already build things that could end humanity. Of course, they don't actually want that, because that level of oversight would massively limit their ability to scale, take on capital from foreign sovereign wealth funds, and throw a lot of impressive but ultimately unfounded numbers around in the press to drive up hype. The arms race framing, in other words, is really just a convenient line, so long as it begins and ends with the government clearing the runway for them, and never actually putting them under the kind of scrutiny it would imply. Which is why, going back to where this video started, Kevin O'Leary may be cooking something here. His actual plan, as far as anyone can tell, isn't really to build the world's largest AI data center in Utah, or before that in Alberta. It is to get on television, sell a story about competing with China to as many state and local governments as he can find, and then use that, personality to stack up regulatory allowances, tax exemptions, and lock in cheap natural gas contracts. And then, if a real consortium with actual capital wants to come along and use those allowances, he flips the package to them, potentially with some kind of perpetual royalty. In the very likely event that nobody actually shows up, he has been very careful to keep his side of all of this remarkably non-committal. Heads, he wins. Tails, the taxpayers of two countries lose. It's the Mr. Wonderful metaphor for the whole industry. Get the governments to bend over backwards to clear the path under the banner of beating China, pocket the value of those allowances, and worry about whether the underlying project ever ships later. It sounds bad, but it gets dumber. The China narrative has been effective at getting governments on board to cut red tape, but so far this is ignoring the biggest irony of all. China is regulating its AI sector like crazy. China's amended cybersecurity law, which took effect on January 1st of this year, included a dedicated AI compliance provision that puts firms on the hook for ethics, risk monitoring, and safety assessments. The US has no equivalent federal law, and a real chunk of the current lobbying effort is dedicated specifically to making sure no state-level law fills that gap either. China requires mandatory algorithm registration for any service offering recommendations or generative content. Companies have to file the name of the service, the application domain, the algorithm type, and a self-assessment report. The US has no equivalent. China made AI-generated content labeling mandatory across text, images, audio, and video, with rules that came into force on September 1st last year. The US has only proposed it. China has published a set of national standards on data security, pre-training data security, and basic security requirements for generative AI services, all of which became enforceable last November. Last month, a Chinese court in Hangzhou ruled that companies cannot fire workers solely to replace them with AI, and that any restructuring on those grounds requires retraining offers, fair reassignment, and proper severance. The US has had no comparable ruling, in part because there is essentially no statutory basis from which one could even be made. It is also worth pointing out that overall, investment from China into AI is considerably lower than it is here in America. So if this is really a race, spending alone isn't going to be the deciding factor. Now, to be clear, China is not exactly a model citizen of any of this, and there is plenty to criticize about how these laws actually get applied. Enforcement is real but selective and politically motivated, with rules getting deployed against companies that fall out of favor and conveniently ignored for companies that haven't. Many provisions are written vaguely enough that they can really only be enforced when the party feels like enforcing them. And most of the financial penalties, by tech company standards, are small enough to be priced in as a cost of doing business rather than treated as a serious deterrent. So no, China is, very obviously, not running a civics class on AI ethics here. A lot of these rules are functionally about state control of information rather than user safety in any meaningful sense. But that is sort of the point. China is strong-arming its tech sector into developing AI in a way that, for better or worse, forwards the interests of the state. America is told that the way to beat this is to let its tech sector do whatever they want in the vague hope that private interest and geopolitical interest align. From the market's point of view, this is already working exactly as intended. And if you want further proof of that, go and watch this video next to find out how OpenAI's problems are already becoming our problems. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.